Matt.
Hi, John.
Hello, everyone. We are live. No, scratch that. We're not live at all. But we're recorded just a few hours ago, which is very short. We're coming to you from Washington, D.C. on the morning after the Iowa caucus. The political world has been shaken up, and Matthew Yglesias from The Atlantic is here with me, Jonathan Chait from The New Republic, to discuss all the stunning developments.
Yes. Right. Iowa caucuses. It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning.
It's shocked the political world to its foundations, and Matthew Yglesias is here with some really sharp insights that you cannot find anywhere else.
Exactly. No, it's interesting because I think, yesterday morning, I think I knew, most people knew, that Barack Obama winning was a very real possibility.
Right.
And yet, it felt really surprising to see it actually happen,
Mm-hmm.
because there'd been such a sort of air of, of not quite inevitability, but I think of all but inevitability around Hillary Clinton. And I had read the stuff about Obama's campaign and its strength and the new caucus goers, and I think said that my official opinion was that the Des Moines Register's poll was probably right, that they probably knew more than I did, but
yeah.
I was still on some level, I was too cynical to really think that, tens of thousands of first-time caucus goers were going to come out. You always hear candidates talking about mobilizing young voters, and it never seems to pan out. And then to see it actually happen is surprising.
Right. No, I mean, like counting on young people with your crazy music and your blogs it's never a good idea.
No. And yet, he made it work.
Yeah. I too was in the camp of the Des Moines Register poll is too crazy to be true. I thought Obama could probably win, but with the turnout figures even exceeding what they projected is just. Mark Blumenthal had this great point. I think it's been cited a few points. Mark Blumenthal, the pollster, about how the rival camps had been knocking down this poll by saying it would be unprecedented, it would be a revolution, it would be the most incredible thing. I think one person even said, well, if he could draw that many voters, he should be the nominee, and then he did. So,
right? No, it does. I'd been very enthusiastic about Obama early in the campaign, and had kind of gotten a little bit disgruntled with some of his antics, some of his sort of running to the right against the other candidates. But pulling off a victory, in this way, not by dragging the opponents down, but by actually delivering. Well, but I mean by delivering on this promise to bring new people into the process. It really makes you think, because it's true, obviously, that one way you could bring about meaningful sort of change in the politics of the country is if you could create new constituencies that haven't been engaged. And Iowa's a small state, but he did it there, which gives you some real reason to believe it can be done.
Yeah. I have a blog item for the New Republic, which should be online by the time people see this segment. And basically, let me deliver the first shocker of this by saying I'm calling the race for Obama. I'm calling the whole Democratic race for Obama.
Yeah, that's
not the Iowa caucus. I'm calling. He will be the nominee. You can wait. You can wait till after whenever it's called by ABC News, or you can wait for her concession speech. You can wait for the convention, but you can get it here right now from me. Hillary's toast. It's over. It's inevitable.
So you don't think? I mean, there's this long tradition. I mean, not in 2004, but in the past of Iowa winners just losing in New Hampshire. I think Hillary's campaign was sending a memo around that I saw showing that the eventual Democratic nominee hasn't won Iowa like in a million times out of a million. And the
Except
John
for the last time.
Sure, right. But there's a case that John Kerry's win there was kind of just a fluke.
Well, you had a series of races where you had a local favorite in Iowa, which meant people weren't contesting it.
Right.
Clinton didn't contest in '92 because Tom Harkin was running, the Iowa senator. In '88, I think you had Paul Simon, Gephardt and Paul Simon, who were both from bordering states and heavily invested in Iowa. And I think Dukakis didn't heavily try in Iowa. I mean, Hillary was. Have you had a case where? Look, you don't have that many data points since the modern primary system developed. It really started in 1972, 76 with Jimmy Carter. Where you had a contested primary instead of an incumbent president, and where you had someone go all in Iowa and lose, and then go on to win the nomination. I don't think that's ever happened before, has it?
No, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it's true that the thing that gives you doubt about the Clinton spin memo is that they were trying to make the case that, well, she's from New York and Obama's from the Midwest. And you remember distinctly that, when before the voting happened in Iowa, right. Hillary Clinton's line was that she's from the Midwest.
Right.
Which in fact she is. She's...
Also, she happens to be white.
Sure.
Like most people in Iowa.
Right. And, I'm from New York. Hillary Clinton isn't.
Right.
There's nothing particularly New York about her. She's from suburban Illinois. Is at least as much Iowa as Barack Obama is.
And honestly, I have to say, as a native and Westerner myself, and a more authentic American than you,
sure.
I think this whole line about how Midwesterners are seething with resentment at the East Coast elites, I never saw it. I spent 22 years in the state of Michigan. That wasn't. I don't remember anyone ever thinking that or saying that.
No,
whatever. I come from a pretty prosperous Detroit suburb,
sure.
So. It could be different in the small towns, but I just don't remember that whole theme. I mean, I think in some cases this is an artifact of people on the East Coast thinking that people in the Midwest sitting around thinking about people on the East Coast all the time, which we don't. Or I guess I'm not we anymore. I've been in Washington for a dozen years, but that it just wasn't part of our mentality.
I seethe with resentment at the people of Iowa and their disproportionate power over things.
Yeah.
Frankly, I'm obsessed. But okay, well, this sounds too agreeable. Maybe we should talk about the Republicans.
Well, yeah, we can go back to the Democrats, but yeah,
sure.
Republicans. You and I both thought that Fred Thompson was going to win.
Fred Thompson, he seemed like dragging him into the race seemed like such a cynical play on the part of the orthodox conservative establishment that
right.
Since I think they're basically cynical people, and cynicism is the right way to look at the Republican Party.
Yeah.
It seemed like it would work. I don't think I was, quite as sure as you were, but it seemed like he'd be a good candidate.
Yeah, I was. Well, let me defend myself. I was somewhat dragooned into a web debate by our web editors who are always looking for more content on the web. So I was a little bit forced to be more assured than I was. But I definitely thought that Fred Thompson was the leading candidate, the most likely guy to get the pick. And I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong in that. And I guess I have a model of how political figures behave, and that assumes that basically they will always seek the highest office and do whatever they need to do to get it. Mm-hmm. It's a somewhat cynical model. So the arguments against Thompson, the main one was that he was too lazy. And I thought, well, come on. Even if he is, I mean, will he really be so lazy that he won't run for president? I mean, that couldn't happen. And then the other one was that the other thing that surprised me was he turned out to be principled, which I never expect from anyone. I'm not just Republicans, anyone. I mean, people can be somewhat principled, but I don't expect them to be principled in a way that seriously damages their chances of winning the presidency. I mean, that never happens.
So wait, what principles do you think brought him down?
Well, there were a couple things. Remember, he wouldn't endorse, what was it, the Human Life Amendment and the Gay Marriage Amendment? He said on Federalist grounds. He was wide open to pander, and the religious right groups were all looking to get behind him. And he went to them and he met with them, and he said he wouldn't support it on Federalist grounds of all things, which is a principle about 4 people take seriously.
Sure. No, that's true. But I mean, the other thing, though, is that, these kind of missteps from Thompson created an opening that Mike Huckabee, kind of walked through as the Southern Protestant real Christian dude in the race. And it seems to me that even though Huckabee is obviously hampered by the distaste that elites have for him, that there's, I think you saw, a real appetite in Iowa, at least, even among Republicans, for a certain measure of economic populism, and if not just the kind of sort of right-wing cultural populism that Thomas Frank writes about. But, a candidate who talked about CEO pay and sought union endorsements. And of course, you always say this with the proviso that the policy background isn't there for Huckabee. But,
right, to say the least.
Right. But, I hadn't really thought that. I don't... It hadn't really occurred to me that there was a substantial Republican constituency who wanted to hear that kind of talk from people, which certainly Fred Thompson and nobody else in the field was prepared to deliver.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a void for the rhetoric. I wrote a column a few weeks ago about Huckabee, how he exposed the total lack of intellectual infrastructure for moderate Republicans. How there are a lot of these figures who I think who have some general disgruntlement with the plutocratic direction of the party. Mm-hmm. They don't have anything to fall back on when they want to construct an alternative. They don't have any think tanks. They don't have any magazines or policy analysts of any kind. The whole infrastructure is in the hands of the far right. So they just end up flailing around when they try to have an alternative, and they endorse vague generalities like Mike Gerson does and David Brooks usually does, or they end up latching onto ideas that are the exact opposite of what they think they are, like Mike Huckabee with the fair tax, just because that was just an idea that was out there, and he's not really sophisticated enough to understand why it's so crazy.
Right, although by the same token, Huckabee in part just seems to have been too, not lazy in the Fred Thompson sense, because he clearly worked hard, but too, intellectually lazy. He didn't... Yeah. You feel like, surely even with his low amount of money, he could have, dispatched an emissary to Washington, D.C. and said, find me a smart, young, conservative guy here who wants to put some kind of reformist agenda together.
They should have hired Reihan Salam.
Right. Exactly. And I'm sure he would have done it. But that there was no...
if you've got a couple million to pay Reihan's salary, he doesn't come cheap, but yeah.
Sure. But there's little sign from Huckabee that he personally had any real interest in trying to sort of put anything together or reach out to anyone.
No, I think that's right, and I think that reflects also part of the style of these, a lot of these Republican moderates is they don't really understand how to think about policy.
Right.
They think very thematically, but they don't understand, the idea of the finite resources. Uh-huh. So they don't like the fact that Democrats crusade against tax cuts for the rich. They're kind of okay with tax cuts for the rich. They just think we should spend less time talking about it and more time. We should have that, and we should have universal health care and education and other things. They don't really get how it works. But in part, look, I have to say, I don't think I think there are tons of politicians at the national level who are no more sophisticated than Huckabee, but they have an intellectual infrastructure to walk them through everything. So they just have someone who's read the policy papers at Heritage who comes in and tells them what to think. And the Democratic side too. I don't think the Democrats are all geniuses. They've got the intellectual infrastructure to think it through. So if you go out on your own, you really have to understand how to think about policy, and not many people do.
But there's also just this mismatch, right? There's a brigade of a dwindling but real brigade of Republican senators and congressmen and state-level politicians from the Northeast and the Midwest who are your moderate Republicans, and that primarily manifests itself with a moderation on social issues, but often they live in districts with high union densities and so on and so forth, and have some interplay with interest groups and think tanks that aren't part of the conservative movement, and whether or not you like how they go, you feel like Arlen Specter could get the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities on the phone if he was so inclined, and deal with these people. But the actual demographic basis for this kind of less plutocratic republicanism really is the Mike Huckabees of the world. It's on the whole other end of the country, the whole other socioeconomic end of it, which is just so that there's no natural affinity between a Mike Huckabee and a classic moderate Republican in the Susan Collins or whomever else mold.
Right. Well, that's another way of saying what you just said is that the actual constituency for Republican economic policies is extremely small.
Sure.
It doesn't have a huge constituency among the suburban Republicans. It doesn't have a huge constituency among the rural Republicans. It really has a very, very tiny constituency because it's a small number of people who derive an enormous benefit from it. I mean, that's Thomas Frank says that, and basically he's right about that.
Right. I mean, that's true, but at the same time, you do see.
There's some. It's just 1% of the country.
Right. I mean, there's I think a larger constituency for it than the group of people who you or I might think are the direct beneficiaries of it. Right. I mean, there's definitely popular anti-tax sentiment in the country.
Right.
And I think
anti-government sentiment, absolutely.
Right.
It's not just 1 or 2% of the country, but it's also, people who favor the economic goals of the Republican Party elite, which is different from popular anti-government sentiment or anti-tax sentiment, and that's a small group.
But a small group that I guess everybody thinks will still be able to put a stop to Huckabee despite his popular support. Right? I mean, nobody.
Yes.
I mean, I saw I was checking out the in-trade markets, and I see they're giving Huckabee, I think, a 18 or something % chance of winning. But I feel like, among the cognoscenti at least, it's felt that the elites can kill him off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he can raise a lot of money off of Iowa. I don't expect it.
Right. But I mean, I guess the problem for the elites keeps being, right. I mean, this is how we started with Fred Thompson, was that all of the candidates in the field seem unacceptable to the sort of the conservative movement. So they tried to bring Thompson into the race, but they weirdly picked a guy who was too lazy.
I know.
To win. And also, I mean, Rudy Giuliani, who I guess I never really considered him the front runner, but he was definitely leading in the national polls and leading in a lot of state polls, and seemed like a formidable contender. I mean,
absolutely.
Do you think he's really dead?
I think he's dead, and basically, you saw very early on that they said that they were going to pursue this national primary strategy where they're going to start really in Florida. They were going to concede however many primaries were before Florida, like 5. They thought they could go over 5.
It's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina.
But essentially, like, their idea was it didn't matter because really only 2% of the delegates will be picked before Florida anyway. So 98% is still on the table, and we'll just start winning in Florida, and then we'll win. Which is as if there's no dynamic interaction. I mean, they're always talking about dynamic scoring and dynamic effects. There's a dynamic interaction between primaries, which everyone who knows anything about politics understands is very powerful. That you can't just lose 5 primaries in a row and then start winning unless all the other candidates die or something.
But, so if Huckabee wins Iowa, or Huckabee already has won Iowa, and then we assume, Huckabee's expectations for New Hampshire are low because it's New England, and because McCain is strong there. But then after New Hampshire comes South Carolina, which is a good Huckabee state, right? So it's possible, it's I think, likely that we'll move into the sort of the Florida, the bigger states phase of this with several viable candidates still in the field.
If Romney loses New Hampshire, do you really think he'll still be viable?
I don't know. I mean, in virtue of his money and so forth, and doubts about McCain among the establishment. I mean, I think you could see him still getting some support, and I think enough for in a state like Florida. If you assume that Huckabee could go there and sort of clean up in the most Dixie-ish kind of parts of Florida, that Giuliani could win a plurality there, and then that's a big enough state that I think then it puts him right back on the map. Maybe you're right,
and part of what this shows actually is if you have Romney staying in, McCain staying in, and Giuliani staying in, even Thompson, they're all splitting a certain kind of vote. They're all acceptable to the establishment, and Huckabee's not.
Right.
So if they're splitting the establishment and continuing to going into February, then Huckabee has a real chance. I mean, it's hard to see that these guys won't. I think they'll just start falling by the wayside. But But if that really happens, then that's Huckabee's real shot there.
But I mean, even Florida, right? I mean, say it's just a three-way. It's Huckabee, it's McCain, and it's Giuliani there, right?
Yeah.
That to me looks like an open field who anyone could win.
Right.
And the Republicans do winner take all primaries in most of these states, so that winning Florida alone, I think, could outpace this kind of stuff. And ideally for Giuliani, he somehow gets into a two-man race with Huckabee. I mean, that seems to be the scenario in which he can win. Right.
Sure.
Which, you laugh, it seems hard, but, Huckabee's strength is among, hardcore religious conservatives, which is a constituency that's dead to Giuliani anyway.
Right. It's just like I'm imagining like some, 22-year-old guy with his scenario for, marrying Scarlett Johansson. And if you get in the position of being on a desert island with Scarlett Johansson, now just grant you that, then you've got a real good shot from that.
But look, I mean, Huckabee, he won Iowa, and he won it by a big margin. It's like like Scarlett's already landed on the desert island.
I don't think so. She's on a cruise ship,
well, she's in
100 miles away.
Stormy waters near islands. I don't know. So the I guess part of this has to do with, how acceptable is John McCain really to the establishment. I never totally understood the unacceptability of John McCain. But I mean, so since you thought he should be the Democratic nominee in 2004,
yes,
he'd be president. I mean, doesn't it seem plausible to you that? The case can be made against him in a Republican primary on the basis of those kind of heresies and his, his alleged, his flirtations with the John Kerry ticket and so forth?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think he's convinced most of them that, like in Cool Hand Luke, he's got his mind right now. He went out and said that no, tax cuts always increase revenue, and no, I would never want to touch the estate tax.
But I mean, it's telling that he couldn't get the National Review endorsement,
right?
Despite that, I mean,
they just would have looked silly having attacked him for so long.
You think, but you don't think they really meant it that Romney and sort of Romney alone is the candidate who unifies the movement and represents the orthodoxy, and that McCain is too flighty?
No, I think that's right. I think they think he is, but at some point you have to decide, winning is more important than anything else. And he is a very, very electable general election candidate. And if the alternative is Huckabee, who's not acceptable to them either, if Romney's completely unelectable, and at some point he'll just become the establishment candidate that he started off as. I think basically like Thompson they've written off. Giuliani is on the verge of getting written off. So I think, anything can happen. This is such a crazy Republican race, but I could easily see the thinking is going to go. He wins New Hampshire. It's him. Romney's going to be in the toilet. It'll be him and Huckabee, and you have basically a guy who you don't trust who can win, and a guy who don't trust who can't win.
So are you still excited about the prospects of a McCain administration?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't take for granted. The conventional wisdom about McCain in the liberal blog sphere is that he simply is and always has been a conventional Republican, and not much different from George W. Bush. And I don't think that's right. I think in his heart, he's still very much the progressive that he was from 2000 through mid 2004. The unanswerable question is, how would he govern? Mm-hmm. He's made a lot of promises to the conservatives, and he would be surrounded, I think, by conservative advisors and appointees. But to what degree would that constrain him? I mean, the old thinking is usually that once someone gets in office, they're not as constrained by the base anymore. That the base has to extract all the promises it can during the primary, and after that, your incentive to run to the center and then govern from the center. Especially if the opposition controls the Congress. Those incentives become very strong. Go on.
Well, but so, I mean, on which issues, it's true. The thing that always struck me about McCain is that while he was definitely an unorthodox Republican, he seemed to find a way to break with the Republicans on a lot of issues that a certain number of people, kind of professionals, found to be really symbolically important, but that don't actually make a difference to people's lives. So that, like, in a John McCain administration, we might have some slightly more onerous regulations on gun ownership and some regulations of political speech, but that he seems every bit as much, if not more, than George W. Bush, unremittingly hostile to, like, the economic interests of real people.
Well, I don't think that's right at all. But first of all, let me make a meta comment, because I have this debate every time I go on Blogging Heads about McCain. I've had it with you and Eric Alterman and Mark Schmidt, and oftentimes I have it with the same person multiple times, and I usually convince them, and then they agree with me, and then, like, 2 weeks ago they forget.
Okay.
So, he has a very long record here. Well, not a very long, but from 2000 through about 2004, he had a number of very serious apostasies that alienated him from the right, and these were not small symbolic things. They were correct in thinking that he was totally hostile to their interests. I mean, much more so than liberals with Joe Lieberman. He denounced the Bush tax cuts in 1999 and 2000. He voted against them in 2001 and 2003. He explicitly voted against them not only on fiscal responsibility grounds, but on class-based grounds. He said too much of them went to the rich. He was concerned about inequality, and he didn't want to be expanding inequality at this time. He was championing a Patients' Bill of Rights, which was strongly opposed by the healthcare industry. You could call it symbolic, but that was a big Democratic issue, and that had serious healthcare opposition. There were other healthcare measures. There was something he co-sponsored with Schumer that was maybe a children's health insurance or something like that. It was a real healthcare bill. Global warming is a big deal. I probably think the biggest domestic issue. And there's obviously a serious constituency on the right that doesn't want to do anything about it, and he's really been out in front of that.
Well, he's sort of been out in front on global warming. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, the global warming...
He was the first Republican to really come out and sponsor legislation on global warming. It's fairly tepid by the standards of today, but by the standards of 2001, it was very aggressive.
No, I mean that's true, but it still leaves you wondering, where it is. I mean, he was enough of a maverick. To this day, right? So while on the one hand, you have Democrats who think global warming is real, so they're proposing legislation that would prevent calamity. And then you have Republicans who deny that global warming is real, and so they oppose legislation that would prevent calamity. McCain says the problem is real, but opposes the legislation that would prevent calamity, but instead proposes some other legislation that wouldn't solve the problem. But so why do I really... I don't know.
Do you think the McCain-Lieberman legislation is totally worthless?
No, it's not totally worthless. I mean, obviously, in a certain practical sense, it's better than nothing. If that's what can pass, it's what can pass. But at the same time, so I wouldn't say that a senator who wants to vote for that legislation is selling out the cause. But a senator who has McCain's position, which I believe is that, he would support that legislation but would oppose any more far-reaching legislation. I mean, that's not really helpful.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he would oppose more far-reaching legislation. I think as president he would probably be in favor of more far-reaching legislation, because it was far-reaching legislation 5 years ago. It's it's considered less so now because the debate has changed. By the way, I wish I brought my list with me, because I didn't know we were going to get this debate. It's my standard list, but it's really kind of shocking. I mean, I'm trying to remember a couple off my head. There was the debate over stock options. Do you remember that? The debate over how to tax stock options and wanting companies to disclose them to the IRS the same way they did to their stockholders. You had huge numbers of Democrats who were opposed to this because they were basically in the pocket of the financial industry. You had a few liberals like Carl Levin who were crusading for it, and McCain was Levin's co-sponsor. You had a lot of issues like this from 2000 to 2004.
But so you think but you don't think that stuff will kill him? I mean, do you? I guess what I'm saying is how I
think it did kill him, and he's back from the dead.
Right, but I mean, do you think he's? I mean, is he such a shallow, like, just brain dead, immoral opportunist, that he would twice in a span of 5 years undergo a complete political conversion? Like, I mean, because to me, I don't know. I mean, I'll just lay it out here. I mean, I don't even remember this detail, but I mean, it seems to me that McCain is one of these pincers, right? Like, either he's just as vicious and heartless as the average Republican, or else this stuff you're saying is true. In which case, he's worse. I mean, he's like one of the most despicable people I've ever heard of. If he's, really went as far left and then all the way back to the right, and like all for what? Yeah. Right? I mean, just out of sheer lust for power, and it's shocking to me that he gets the kind of good press he does, and specifically, right, that what he gets is a reputation as an honest person and a straight talker. When what you're saying is that he's someone who, I don't know what, I mean, he's a huge liar.
He'll do anything to get elected president.
Yeah, but
He'll do anything, yeah.
But I mean,
but I think that's true of most of them. I mean, this is what I was saying earlier. I have a very, very cynical view of of politicians, and my model is that basically anyone will do anything they need to do to get elected, and the reason they will isn't necessarily evil. It's that you say to yourself, I think as president, you really believe that I can do incredibly good things for the country, and you believe that. So from that point, say, well, should I make compromise A in order to get in a position to do a greater good? Sure, and almost any compromise, any flip-flop can be justified by that calculus, can be morally justified. I think that's how they think. I think that's pretty much how all of them think. That's why I was so stunned that Fred Thompson, of all people, refused to do it. But I think that's incredibly rare. I think they'll all do it. Yeah, McCain would. Sure. Yeah. I think he's that much. I think he's willing. So, you can use words like opportunist, scumbag, whatever you want to call him. But basically, I think that pretty much describes all of the people who are running for president.
But McCain is the only one whose political persona is based exclusively on this totally undeserved reputation for honesty.
Agreed. Totally agreed. No, that's the weird thing. I always got lumped in with these McCainiacs, which I was, but not on these personality hero truth teller grounds. I appreciated the fact that he was undergoing a revolution in his own thinking. He had become unmoored from conservative orthodoxy, started thinking about these issues that he'd never thought about before, and was really turning into a Teddy Roosevelt progressive Republican, which I thought was very historically significant. But I think this whole thing about how he's unwavering and blah 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 willing to pay the price, I think it's almost it's not entirely crap. Like he was willing to stand up on torture. Right, which is unpopular. He's willing to take a couple stands, but it's 90%. It's 90% hokum. I agree.
But so I mean, does that mean now that the McCain we see now is the McCain we would get if he ran? I mean, if he runs on a platform of saying that tax cuts boost revenue and so on and so forth. I mean, is there anything?
Jerry Falwell was a great guy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Falwell. I mean, whatever. I mean, it's. Jerry Falwell's not a real policy question,
right?
But I mean, but this other stuff is, and I think he even because somehow the Lieberman-McCain bill on global warming became the Lieberman-Warner bill, because I think McCain somehow managed to disavow it to work his way in,
and in immigration too. It's things just like I get the lesson, I get the message, which is his way of saying I'll be quiet now, which should harm his reputation for an unvarnished truth teller, but it somehow doesn't.
Right, although on immigration it's almost different. I mean, because it seems like he picked up the cause of comprehensive reform when... Well, I mean, that was what the Republican Party establishment was doing. I mean, that was George W. Bush's bill.
Yep.
Right, so I mean, it's not even like I think he sold out some kind of like long-time principle to generous immigration policy there, right? He just kind of picked it up and then dropped it.
That's right, but I'm sure that's his real, like, I think 90% of the people in Washington of both parties, that's his real view. He's pro-immigration.
You think 90%?
Oh, yeah. Of the elites? Sure.
Interesting.
I mean, people in Washington, like national level Republicans and Democrats, yeah. They don't care about this stuff.
No.
They like having, cheap immigrants mow their lawn.
Could be.
Or they're for immigration, and I think they're sentimentally for immigration as well.
Right. I'm sentimentally for it.
Yeah.
I'll grant you that. I don't know. I keep hearing people predicting electoral doom for pro-immigration candidates. And people predicting it in a manner that suggests to me that they're not engaged in a dispassionate analysis, but that they, in fact, have become believers in the anti-immigration cause.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think there is an enormous gulf between popular sentiment on immigration and intensity and elite sentiment. And, you know, I mean, I've seen you've blogged about this before, and there's obviously like a big, you know, political market out there that isn't being served by the two parties.
Sure. Although maybe it will be soon. Or is now. I mean, I guess, right? I mean, the Republicans have all gotten orthodox on immigration, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they have.
So, you know, and that's how we go. So everyone will be rounded up. Is there anything more to say about the Democrats? What do you think on the merits about it?
Of what, of him?
Well, so you think Obama's going to win? Are you happy about that?
I'm happy. Yeah. He's been my choice for a while.
Oh.
You know, again, my reasons are. I'm a cynic, as you can tell.
Sure.
My reasons are fairly cynical. I don't think there's a huge policy gulf between him and Clinton. I think she's a very poor politician, and I think he's a very, very good one. So, you know, I want someone who can win and get his program enacted. Basically.
So you don't believe he's soft?
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't mostly subscribe to the Krugman blog critique of him, in part out of cynicism. I think with the thematic thing of how he wants to bring people together and appeal to Republicans, I don't see this as being. This isn't Liebermanism. I think it's a belief in himself and his potential as a unifier and a communicator to bring people essentially to his viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. But Lieberman wasn't always really a Liebermanist, don't you think?
I'm sorry. One more time.
Well, you said for Obama, this isn't Liebermanism,
right?
But Lieberman, I feel like even Lieberman didn't. Lieberman used to be much more a politician who kind of talked this talk, but was really a totally conventional Democrat. But evolved more and more. I mean, to the point where he's now, endorsing the new right-wing version of John McCain. Not that I think Obama will go in that direction. But I think the theory is that this rhetoric has a kind of self-fulfilling quality to it. That if you succeed by sort of triangulating against trial lawyers and liberals and whomever else, and that works for you, that it sort of draws you more and more into that direction, because making policy is a political endeavor in terms of what things you propose and what you actually do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because I go back and forth on this. I mean, sometimes I try to make the case. Well, you look at George W. Bush and the things he said on the campaign trail in 2000, and well, he was just lying. So, the optimistic scenario for Obama is it's the same thing. He's going to bring people together, blah, blah, blah. Andrew Sullivan's going to write cover stories about how great he is. David Brooks loves him, blah, blah, blah. But, really, he's still this, hardcore dude who left college and wanted to be a community organizer in Chicago. But the difference is that the Democratic Party isn't, in mostly good ways, isn't controlled by the same kind of narrow, evil conspiracy that controls the Republican Party, which is mostly good because it makes it less narrow and evil, but also more difficult to implement a program of just lying about what you intend to do.
That's right. I mean, that's the key point, I think. So Bush was claiming he would bring a lot of people together and be cross-partisan, but he had a very partisan agenda all along, and it was an unpopular agenda. And that's the difference with Obama, is that I think Obama's thinking, this is just my guess, is that his ideas are popular ones, like healthcare reform. They're popular, but you can't get them enacted because of partisan polarization, which just encourages everyone to just like see everything through sheer donkey versus elephant terms. But if you can get people to break out of that, you'll see that there's a lot in common, and it's mostly a pretty democratic agenda. So I think a huge number of Republicans, don't care about having tax cuts for the rich above everything else, and they want health care reform. And so there are other things like that. So if you can simply communicate to them on that basis, you can get them, which is not the case of what George W. Bush could do with his agenda. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think the key difference is.
I see. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. And, I just get...
basically, like, if you look at how healthcare failed in 1993,
right.
it was all by identifying it. It was all through polarization. It was identifying it with Hillary and Bill. It was Hillary care, right? If you did, the Wall Street Journal did a poll where they read people every element of the plan, and they agreed with every element of the plan.
Right.
But they just didn't like the Clinton plan. Because it was Clinton. People hated Clinton. So you just like, well, if people like Obama, they'll like the Obama plan. Even if it's the same plan. I mean, I don't think it will be the same plan, but
right. But I mean, the criticism here is that exactly what you said, that's the true story, though, that things are polarized because the Republican Party and the interest groups who support it create a polarized environment, and that the risk is that Barack Obama naively believes his own hype and thinks that he's somehow so super awesome that he's going to transcend this dynamic, and, is going to be totally unprepared for when he realizes that, it's a brick wall, that, his opponents are not operating in a context of good faith agreement or disagreement, and it doesn't really matter how charming people find him.
Well, I think there, a couple of responses, I would say. Look, I can't be, he could be elected and it could all end in total disaster.
Sure, granted.
But number one, I think he's effective at communicating with the public. Very effective. I mean, he's a great communicator. So, he won't become, I don't think he could be made as unpopular as Clinton was. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I think he's better than Clinton. And he doesn't have, frankly, I mean, there is some real ethical and, personal baggage with Clinton that made him vulnerable to some of these attacks that I don't think Obama has. So I think Obama will do better at avoiding becoming the kind of unpopular figure whose personal popularity can be used to drag down his views. And then relatedly, I think he has faith in his ability to go across the aisle and sort of charm people in rooms. And it's true, you can't do that with the Tom DeLays of the world. Mm-hmm. But I think there are a lot of Republicans, especially in a context where it's a popular president, which sort of brings us back to the first point.
Right.
So if it's a popular president, he can actually sit in the room and reason with him. I think he has a lot of faith in his ability to do that. And I don't think that faith it may be overstated. I don't think it's completely wild. I don't think it's completely naive.
Right. Well, I mean, given that the practical alternative is Hillary Clinton, I mean, I do find that persuasive. I mean, I wrote an article with Sam Rosenfeld some time ago, more, before the field had really taken shape, but, just making the case in the abstract against Hillary, trying to, not do it in a hatery kind of way, but, She's
a very grim choice.
Right. She's not... I would pick somebody with her political problems if I thought the reason the alternatives were more popular is that they were clearly running on much more conservative agendas.
Yep.
Or something, and say, well, we'll take the chance on the real progressive, but there's
nothing...
John
John Breaux is the alternative.
Right. But there's nothing... There's nothing to suggest that, and
right.
So it seems to me, I had this last-minute personal surge of support for John Edwards, seemingly too little and too late, which brings back to the fact that despite whatever sort of doubts I may have about Obama's approach, and I'm not really thrilled at the direction he took this, it's still true that he has as liberal record as anybody else, and is not only polls more popular, but I mean you can see it's night and day watching them speak, and I think people sometimes resort to somewhat esoteric arguments to try to deny the obvious fact that he would be a stronger candidate.
Yeah, than Clinton.
Right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we agree.